Hello everyone, my name is Daria, welcome back to my channel. And today, or I should say over the next couple of days, couple of weeks, if we're being honest here, I am going to be attempting to read all the Bridgerton books. With some caveats. I will not be reading The Duke and I or The Viscount Who Loved Me in this video, but for two very different reasons. When it comes to The Viscount Who Loved Me, I think you all know my feelings on that book. I enjoyed it. I enjoy book Kate and Anthony, but they really pale in comparison to show Anthony in my mind. I also recently reread that book in January and February, so I just don't really want to reread it again. When it comes to The Duke and I, however, I have never read that book. I will never read that book. When it comes to the rest of the series, I actually have already read An Offer from a Gentleman and Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which are Benedict and Colin stories, respectively. It's been over a year since I read those two books, however, so while I remember the feelings that they elicited in me, I don't quite remember what happened in those books, and the whole point of this video is for me to tell you what goes down in these books without you having to read them. So let's go ahead and revisit my original Goodreads reviews for both these books. Over a year ago, I gave An Offer from a Gentleman 2 stars, and the opening lines of the review is, "Oof, period." That's all I really have to say, because this one was a slog, my friends. Yeah. At this point, while I'm filming this intro, I have already reread this book, and 2021 Daria, I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. As for Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, I gave this 3 stars, but in my review, I even say that it's closer to like a 3.5 star read. I remember thinking, back when I read this book, that I feel like Romancing Mr. Bridgerton was the book that honestly had the most substance out of all 3. I feel like Colin and Penelope's conflict in their story was like the most realistic, the most understandable. I'm really excited for this experiment. I am excited to read An Offer from a Gentleman and Romancing Mr. Bridgerton and see what exactly may make it into the show. As for the other 4 siblings, so Eloise, Francesca, Hyacinth, and Gregory, I have heard from so many of the book readers that those 4 books are really great. Actually, no, sorry, I take that back. I have heard that Francesca, Hyacinth, and Gregory's books are really great. I have heard that Eloise's book is, interesting? I'm getting ahead of myself though, so let's just rewind, take it back, and let's jump into An Offer from a Gentleman for the second time. But before we go any further, I want to stop and thank the sponsor of this video, HelloFresh. In the time that I've been using HelloFresh, I think the thing that stands out to me the most is just how much time, money, and frankly stress I'm saving myself. I've sort of taken on the mantle of the cook in my house. I'm currently living with my parents, and it's so nice to be able to just get a quick, healthy, and delicious meal done in 30 minutes or less. All the recipes are super simple, super easy to follow, and they pre-portion all of their ingredients so you're not wasting any perfectly good produce. Another thing I truly love about HelloFresh is their dedication to sustainability. Nearly all of the packaging that you guys saw that these ingredients came in is recyclable. So you guys are watching me prepare and cook the chicken sausage and pesto tortellini, which was absolutely delicious. And another thing that I really love about HelloFresh is that it's kind of allowing me to pay it back to my parents. Like I mentioned, I am cooking these meals for them and for us to share as a family, and it just reminds me of all the nights that they would spend cooking for me and my sister, preparing these really hearty and healthy meals, and now I get to do the same for them now that I'm older with help from HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code FULLOFLIT16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts as well. Oh, that is really good. All I have to say is my parents better hurry back home because I'm liable to finish this, like, immediately. Hi! Yeah, hair in my mouth. So let's pretend that this wasn't filmed on the same night that I also filmed my intro and that I didn't change out of my dress because it was super uncomfortable and really sweaty and made out of really horrible material. Okay? So, An Offer from a Gentleman. My initial assessment of this as a 2-star book holds up. In fact, I think I might even bump it lower. The really funny thing about book Benedict is that he's constantly complaining that no one really remembers him or knows anything about him. He's always being referred to as another Bridgerton or number 2. And you know what? Benedict, buddy, I'm gonna level with you. Maybe if you actually got yourself a personality, people would remember you. Just a thought. So in the prologue of this book, we are introduced to Sophie Beckett, who is Benedict's love interest and the heroine of our story. Benedict is the bastard, or the illegitimate child of an earl, but while the earl doesn't really recognize her as his daughter, like in society, he does provide her with a lot of comforts. He gives her the education that any lady would get. He allows her to live in his home, but of course he doesn't really acknowledge her as his daughter, which has got to sting. And because this is a Cinderella retelling, of course we need a wicked stepmother and wicked stepsisters. The Earl remarries to a woman named Araminta, and Araminta has two daughters, Rosamond and Posy. Rosamond sucks. Araminta sucks. Posy kind of sucks. Like, she doesn't really treat Sophie like shit, but then again, she doesn't really do anything, but at the same time, Rosamond and Araminta are really mean to Posy, so, like, I feel kind of bad for her. Anyway, as Cinderella stories go, the Earl dies. He leaves Sophie a dowry and tells Araminta that you need to provide for Sophie until she is, I think, 20 years old, or else you'll get a significantly reduced amount of money per month. If you take care of Sophie, however, I'll give you more money. Araminta does not divulge the details of the Earl's will to Sophie, and one night during the Bridgerton masquerade, Sophie escapes from the house with the help of the cook, the staff, the maids, at the Earl's home. They all dress her up, they send her to the Bridgerton masquerade ball, and that is where she meets Benedict. They dance, they flirt, they kiss, and then Sophie discovers that he is a Bridgerton brother. Now, Araminta figures out that Sophie wore her beautiful shoes to the ball, and I can't remember exactly the details, but basically they get into like an argument and a scuffle, and Sophie kind of yells and gets mad, and she ends up running away from the house. Then the book does a time skip of 2 years, and throughout that 2 years, Benedict has been searching for this lady in silver. For him, it was love at first sight. He thinks about her all the time. He's convinced that she is a lady because she dressed like a lady and talked like a lady, and, you know, what's that saying about the duck? One night, Benedict is at a party at some person's house. Can't remember his name. It starts with a C, I believe. Anyway, he's at this dude's house. All these men are getting rowdy. Sophie is actually a servant at this countryside manor. And the young man of the house, the heir to the house, he's a creep. Let's just put it like that. He's creepy, he's weird, he's always like hitting on Sophie, and Sophie, now that the dude's parents are away and he's in charge of the house, she's like, yikes. Bad situation, this party, everyone's drinking, I'm out of here. So she is trying to sneak away from this party, but then the heir, whatever his name is, and his friends catch her. And listen, I already was not a fan of the book so far. This scene right here is where I start to have real issues. If you guys have been subscribers of this channel for a while, then you know that I despise the romance trope. I don't even, why is this a romance trope? It's the trope in which the heroine is about to be assaulted, abused, some sort of sexual violence is about to be enacted upon her, and then the hero like swoops in on his white horse and saves the day. I don't like it. And the thing that particularly bugs me about this trope is that the focus seems to be more on the hero, the guy, than it is the girl. It's all about proving, you know, what a good guy he is. I sincerely hope that they cut this scene from the show. It does not need to exist. Not at all. Unless they're gonna pull another, like, Daphne and Berbrook moment in which she, like, punches the lights out of him, I don't want to see it. Take it back. He offers employment to Sophie and says, come with me and you can work at my mother's house. Benedict and Sophie make it to my cottage. So, let me try to explain this. Benedict's cottage is literally called my cottage. Does that make sense? It was confusing to me every time that it was, like, used in the book. But anyway, I digress. They get there, they arrive, Benedict falls ill, and Sophie treats him and helps him, you know, restore his health or whatever. And she sort of says, like, this is my repayment. You saved my life, and now I saved your life. Cool, fine, whatever. I don't care. Oh god, I sound so mean. I sound so mean and bitter, don't I? I don't know why I'm so angry. I think it's because I love Show Benedict so much, and I cannot do this storyline. They spend so much time at this cottage, and there's literally no point to it. There's no point. There is nothing. I get nothing from this part of the story. The book spends way too much time in this cottage storyline. I should probably mention here that Benedict doesn't know that Sophie is the Lady in Silver. One, because he thinks that the Lady in Silver is like an actual lady of the town and not a random servant. Sophie has also like become way thinner than she was back then, and she also cut her hair and it's a bit darker, so he doesn't recognize her. I should also mention that during their stay at this cottage, Benedict, he's like attracted to Sophie from the beginning. He feels really connected to her, and he sort of like buckles and asks her to be his mistress. I say ask, but this man was like on his knees, like salivating at the mouth, being like, please be my mistress, I'll give you whatever you want, I'll give you jewels, I'll give you a house, like just be my mistress. Then he starts getting really entitled about it and saying that there's no way she could possibly refuse him. He could give her this incredible life that she couldn't have any other way. Starts talking about how he can't leave her alone to fend for herself and that he's the best option she has. Just like all this stupid bullshit. And it gets to the point that he's being so rude and arrogant and like just selfish that she decks him. So he falls to the ground and then he grabs her ankle and then like pulls her to the ground. Julia Quinn seems to include a lot of like physical, I guess, I don't know if you could call it comedy. I think that's what she's going for. I would call them altercations between her main couples. Like in The Viscount Who Loved Me, at one point Anthony is like stepping on Kate's hand when she's hiding under a desk and he's kicking her and she's like, you know, punching his foot. And like, I think she's trying to go for comedy. Similarly in this scene with like Sophie punching Benedict and then him like dragging her to the floor. But is it funny? Because I don't find it funny. Maybe my sense of humor is just not my sense of humor, but I just don't find it that funny. I don't like it. The thing is, with Julia Quinn's work and with a lot of historical fiction, especially those written in the 2000s, I try to take everything with a grain of salt. Like, I do expect a certain level of misogyny and just, I guess for lack of a better word, other problematic elements to be present in the story. And I think I do a pretty good job with like holding those criticisms in one part of my brain while still trying to enjoy the story. But I feel like with this book, it gets to the point where I just can't do it. I think all of us have like a threshold that we can like deal with, but that it just gets to the point that you can't. Like, you can't. I think another reason it just gets to me so bad with the Bridgerton books is because I was introduced to this world through the show, and I think especially in the second season, they did a really great job cutting out those elements that were misogynistic, that were uncomfortable, the moments in which Anthony is aggressive towards Kate. Don't get me wrong, the show still has its shortcomings, of course. I'm talking to you, season 1, episode 6. But in general, it seems like they're making like a concerted effort to include more like modern day sensibilities into a Regency era show. So when I read the books, it's really jarring to see the main couple like swinging at each other and dragging each other to the ground, and Benedict just being this like elitist, misogynistic dickhead. And for me, when I'm reading a romance book with any sort of subgenre, contemporary, historical, I'm always going to kind of self-insert and imagine myself in that scenario and how I would react. So, these two going like balls to the wall and swinging at each other, and Benedict just being the dick that he is, it's not appealing, to say the least. It's not really something that I would fantasize about or daydream about. So, yeah. Anyway, back to the book. So basically, Benedict is kind of like sitting with himself and wondering like, why the hell is she refusing me? And then he sort of puts 2 and 2 together and figures out on his own that she's illegitimate. And then he gets like weirdly happy about that. I'm not exactly sure what his line of thinking is. I don't think it's something that you and I will ever be able to comprehend. But he basically sees this like as his way in with her. He basically goes to her and is playing like this white knight role again, being like, you don't have to live like this, I can make your life so great, be my mistress, it's like the best thing, like I can offer you all these things. And like, she said no. Let's start with that. And Sophie reminds him that she said no. And then, I don't know if it's him who mentions kids or her, but basically Sophie says, I do not want to have an illegitimate child. I know what kind of life that is like. At best, you're completely ignored and seen as this shameful secret. At worst, you're tossed aside, like yesterday's trash. And what, pray tell, do you think Benedict's response to this is? Does he back off and say, okay, I respect your boundaries. That's a hard boundary. That's a line that you've drawn. I'll back off. Of course not. He basically gives her an ultimatum, gives her one of two options. Either be his mistress, or he can move in with his mother and be a servant in her home. So Sophie becomes a lady's maid to Eloise, Francesca, and Hyacinth. She gets along with all the Bridgerton ladies, including Miss Violet, who is a godsend. I love her anytime she pops up. Just an icon. Eventually, Sophie and Benedict do sleep together, and it was underwhelming sex. I am surprised that she got any enjoyment out of that, but you know, whatever. And immediately after, Benedict just talks and walks like she's gonna be his mistress. Like, he just assumes that now that they slept together, that's what's gonna happen. And she calls what happened between them a lapse in judgment and leaves. Yes. So later on, Benedict sees Sophie playing with a bunch of little kids in the Bridgerton house, and she's like blindfolded, so you can only see like the bottom half of her face, and that is when he realizes she was the lady in silver. And in classic Benedict fashion, he lashes out and gets angry at her. So Benedict pulls her aside. He goes absolutely off on her for keeping this a secret. And in the middle of the argument, in the heat of the moment, Sophie reveals her true identity as the illegitimate child of the Earl of Penwood. And Sophie is like so overwhelmed by everything that goes down that she tries to sneak away from the house in the middle of the night and leave. And that is when she runs into her stepmother. And Araminta gets her arrested on the charges of thievery. The next morning, I believe, Benedict and Violet read Whistledown. They read Whistledown, they figure out that Sophie is under arrest, and they go to break her out of jail. So Benedict and Violet show up to the jail where Sophie is being held, and Araminta is there. And then Araminta's younger daughter, Posey, she says that the thievery accusation is a lie, that her mom just like made that up. And she also tells Sophie and everyone there that the Earl actually did leave Sophie a dowry, which again was something that Araminta hid from Sophie all the way at the beginning of the book. And then Violet just pulls an absolutely badass move, and she tells Araminta that she has to keep the secret of Sophie's birth, and that she will acknowledge Sophie as the Earl's ward, and that will sort of be what everyone thinks of her as. And in this way, Sophie is now respectable enough for Benedict to marry her. Benedict, in the final few chapters, finally comes around and apologizes to Sophie for the way that he treated her and how he sort of was always pushing for her to be his mistress, and then she apologizes for not being truthful about her identity, and then they get married, and I don't care. I wrote in my notes in capital letters, "Good God, I don't care, thank God it's over." I really can't think of a single thing about this book that I would keep in the show. I actually think that there's a very easy fix for a lot of the issues in this book, and it all has to do with, in my mind, Sophie becoming a governess instead of a servant. Now, throughout the book, Sophie will constantly mention that she wants to be a governess, that she's tried for those positions, but can't get anywhere because she doesn't have the proper references. Now, is a governess still below a Bridgerton in the pecking order? Yes. But I think having Sophie be a governess grants her a lot more autonomy. I just personally, like, in my head, have made up this headcanon that Sophie's going to be a governess for the two younger kids. Like, I am so delusional. There is no, like, literally no evidence that this will ever happen. But in my mind, I'm convinced. So as I mentioned at the start of this video, of all the 3 Bridgerton books that I've read so far, I would have to say that Romancing Mr. Bridgerton definitely has the most substance. The primary conflict in this story and between Penelope and Colin is the reveal of Penelope's identity as Lady Whistledown. And the ramifications of that revelation, I feel like it brought a lot of like understandable angst and struggle to their relationship. The fact that she's kept this a secret, the fact that if it got out, it could ruin both her and Colin, the way that it kind of impacts Colin, because we find out in this book that Colin also has a passion for writing, and there is this kind of jealousy that he feels towards Penelope for her having this purpose, this body of work that she can point at and say, like, this is something that's mine, that I've done, that I can show to people, I have this legacy. Whereas Colin feels like he doesn't really have that in any aspect of his life. Colin is viewed by many people as the charmer. He, like every single other Bridgerton hero, is a rake, and he's a big flirt. Everyone knows that Colin is down for a good time, that he's fun to have around, and while Colin does enjoy getting his flirt on and being the center of attention. He also feels like a lot of people don't see him as anyone with substance. They view him as this very, like, shallow, fun guy. But I'm, like, totally getting ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and break down the book beat by beat. So we start off, and in the prologue, we just hear about Penelope and the moment when she was 16 years old and fell in love with Colin after he fell off of a horse. Fast forward to when Penelope is a spinster at the ripe old age of 28, and Colin has just returned from Greece, and he is 33 years old. Now, after reading this, I feel like I really should have known that they were going to do Colin, because in the show, Colin just got back from Greece. That was the first big clue. I like completely forgot that happened in this book, but I see what you did there, Bridgerton writing room. There's a really important moment between Colin and Penelope that actually occurs in the third book that kind of like kickstarts their romance and their story. Colin, Benedict, and Anthony are all hanging around outside the Bridgerton house, and Benedict and Anthony are just teasing Colin about marriage and about, you know, their mom wanting to get him married, and, you know, what about Penelope Featherington? And in a moment of, like, embarrassment and just wanting his brothers to leave him the hell alone, he bursts out saying, I will never marry anyone, you know, least of all Penelope Featherington. And of course Penelope is right there and hears it. And I think this moment causes a real shift in Penelope's mind of how she, like, looks at Colin and thinks about Colin. She always really idolized and idealized him, and after hearing this, she kind of just lets go of that, like, fantasy and that childhood crush. And I've actually heard Nicola Coughlan say the same thing about this moment in the show, that this conversation causes Penelope to take Colin off the pedestal that she always puts him on. After this incident, Pen and Colin remain pretty good friends. Whenever they see each other, they tease, they talk. Penelope and Colin are attending this ball, they're chatting, and Lady Danbury comes over, and she basically issues a wager of £1,000 to whoever can reveal the identity of Lady Whistledown. Now this spreads across the entire ballroom, and soon the whole town knows about this wager, and everyone's already interested in Lady Whistledown and who she might be, but this £1,000 reward has made everyone all the more interested. The next significant thing to happen is when Pen comes to visit Eloise, I believe, and she's sitting in some room and sees Colin's journal, where he writes down basically like a daily journal diary entries of his experiences traveling, which he does very often. So Colin catches her and gets really upset and honestly acts like a bit of a brat about it, and then he goes on this whole tangent about how like hard it is for him to be this popular, charming guy, and how no one likes him for anything like real, or no one sees any substance in him as a person. And it's just really not a good look to be complaining about how popular you are to a girl who is now a spinster, who no one has paid attention to, whom her own family doesn't really even see her as a person or as someone worthy of attention. And Penelope sort of calls him out on this, and he realizes it as well, so he apologizes, and from then on, him and Penelope are just spending more and more time together, and Colin really starts to value Penelope as a person and as a friend. And then, I'm not exactly sure how they get there, but eventually, Penelope sort of asks Colin to kiss her. She says that she doesn't want to live her entire life having never kissed a man, that she's already 28 years old, never been kissed, and she just wants Colin to do her this favor and kiss her. And at first he's hesitating because he realizes after asking him to do this that he actually really wants to kiss her. So they kiss, and it's cute or whatever. So at the next ball, Lady Whistledown actually publishes an article saying that she is finally retiring. And then at that same ball, Cressida Cowper announces that she is actually Lady Whistledown. So the next day, Colin goes to see Penelope, and he sees her getting in an unmarked carriage. So he ends up following her deep into the city of London, and he sees her get out and go into this church, and he follows her in there as well. He sees that Penelope takes out an envelope and puts it underneath a pew, and then he confronts Penelope, and he gets, like, really angry. Like, what the hell are you doing here? You should not be in the city, unchaperoned. This is very dangerous. So he grabs the envelope, ends up ripping it open, reading, and sees that it is a column from Lady Whistledown, and she basically is, like, coming out of retirement to be like, Cressida is not Lady Whistledown. She's not me. So obviously Colin now knows that Pen is Lady Whistledown. And you know, I like Colin, I do, but he was getting so, like, pissy and angry over Pen being Lady Whistledown, and he really had no fucking right to be. There's, like, such a fundamental difference between Whistledown in the books and Whistledown in the show. Whistledown in the books is basically just like any other, like, gossipy, like, mother or woman of the ton. All she does is, like, talk shit about people's dresses and color choices and speculates about who's getting married. Like, that's it. Lady Whistledown in the show, though, like, she ruins lives. Like, she's out here destroying reputations and families. So I would expect this, like, intense reaction if it was show Colin. And what really annoys me is that Colin's initial anger towards Penelope is mostly about the fact that she kind of, like, ruined this image he had of her as, like, this quiet, demure, sort of, like, perfect, naive girl on the sidelines. He's upset that she's not the person he thought she was and that she is capable of keeping a secret like this. And honestly, Colin, you need to get over that. Or you can fuck off. But then I don't have to wait too long until Colin gets himself back in my good graces. He's in the carriage and there's lots of, like, heavy petting and making out going on, and then they immediately go to Featherington House. This scene at Featherington House is probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire series. It is so funny and so, like, Jane Austen-esque. In this scene, Mrs. Featherington reminds me so much of Mrs. Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. Just the absolute ridiculousness and hilarity and the inability to, like, read the room. It's incredible. Colin shows up with Penelope in the early hours of the morning, and the entire, like, Featherington family, the whole extended family, are in the dining room. And the entire time, this entire book, Mrs. Featherington has been convinced that Colin is going to marry her youngest daughter, Felicity, who doesn't exist in the show, by the way. And so when Colin shows up, she's, like, forcing Pen to move aside. She's making Colin and Felicity sit next to each other. She's trying to get Felicity to show Colin her watercolors. And the entire time, Felicity and Colin and Pen are just sitting there like, you dumb fucking bitch. Like, he's just not interested in Felicity. And then finally, after, like, all this back and forth and ridiculousness and hilarity, Colin finally just, like, stands up and says, I want to marry Penelope for this, and this reason. And it got me a little bit. Okay, Colin, I forgive you. So then there's a lot of, like, honestly just, like, filler scenes, fluff scenes, sexy scenes, but throughout the entire time, Colin is just kind of questioning whether or not he really loves Penelope, because he has always thought that love is, like, this thing that just, like, comes at you. Like, similarly to Benedict and Sophie, he thinks he's just going to see a woman at a ball one night and fall instantly in love. So he is just kind of questioning, is it possible for him to be in love with someone when it comes on so slowly? So he's just kind of questioning his feelings. So Violet hosts a engagement party for Colin and Penelope, and during that engagement party, the final Lady Whistledown comes out, and is that same column that Colin found in the church, in which Lady Whistledown says that Cressida is lying. So that Lady Whistledown column gets distributed at their engagement party, and Colin is pissed. He, like, grips Penelope's arm, like, super hard and, like, drags her out of the room and then starts, like, going off on her, which I didn't like, not in the slightest. Loosen your grip, sir. Calm down, sir. So earlier in the book, Pen and Colin had come to this agreement that she was going to let go of Whistledown. And Pen explains that she just simply could not let Cressida take the credit for her life's work. And it's not even that it's Cressida, like, she doesn't want anyone to have the credit for something that she has made on her own, that she's worked so hard for. Like, Lady Whistledown is hers. And it's in that moment that Colin realizes that a lot of his anger comes from jealousy. Pen, she has this legacy. She can look to Lady Whistledown, point to Lady Whistledown, and feel accomplished, that she's done something. She has something that represents her and all of her efforts, and Colin doesn't have anything like that. However, he doesn't explain this to her, so instead, Penelope just thinks that he's ashamed of her work as Lady Whistledown. But eventually, Colin comes around, and he has Pen read all of his journals, which he's never showed to anybody, but he lets her read them, and says that he really values her opinion, and he wants to know if she thinks that they're any good. And he does the mature thing, finally, and instead of being a little baby about it, he sits her down and tells her, look, I had these, like, irrational feelings of jealousy. I'm sorry. I value your opinion more than anyone else's, and I'm really proud of you and the work you did as Lady Whistledown. It's an incredible accomplishment. Julia Quinn always does this. She always has her heroes apologize, like, right at the very end of the book. I think I'm gonna let Colin have this one because I can understand those feelings of jealousy. But with Benedict, it simply didn't work. But Colin, I'm gonna let you get away with it. So then we have our final conflict that wraps up the book. And this occurs when Cressida comes to Pen and basically reveals that she knows that she is Lady Whistledown. And she blackmails Penelope and says that I will reveal your identity unless you give me 10,000 pounds. So she tells Colin about this. And then Colin basically sets up the scheme with all of his family, wherein at Simon and Daphne's, like, final ball of the season, he brings Penelope up in front of the entire town and announces that she is Lady Whistledown. He declares his love for her, he declares how proud he is of her, and then the whole room is kind of quiet, and then I'm sorry. It's just so, like, trite what happens next. Basically, there's like a single clap from the audience, and it's Lady Danbury clapping, and then Anthony joins in, and then Simon joins in, and then the whole room is like clapping and cheering for them. Which, come on now, really? It's very convenient. It's very trite. Like, there's no way that it is going down like this in the show. The way that she has ruined lives, the things that she said, no way. No way. In fact, I'm actually of the opinion that I don't think they're going to reveal Penelope's identity as Lady Whistledown to the general ton. I think that in the show, Colin will find out, and maybe the rest of the Bridgerton family, but I think they're going to try to, like, keep it within the family, because I really don't think that Penelope or anyone related to her would be able to survive the backlash of the taunt. I actually think they might do this thing where they reveal her identity, and in an attempt to, like, save her and protect her, Colin proposes marriage. I don't know. But I know for sure that they're not going to do this kind of, like, grand announcement at a ball. I'm even more sure that no one's going to be fucking clapping for her. So I was a lot calmer while talking about this book compared to An Offer from a Gentleman, because while Colin was, like, annoying with his jealousy and the way he lashed out, I still could understand where he was coming from and empathize with those feelings. I think, even though I'm a really big fan of Kate and Anthony, I can make the objective statement that Colin and Penelope's story is definitely the best written story and the best structured and plotted novel. I really don't know where to begin. Let me start off by saying that for those of you who thought I was a bit too heated, a bit too angry whilst talking about An Offer from a Gentleman, if you thought that I was a little bit too hard on book Benedict, you are not going to want to know what I think about this book and what I particularly think about one Sir Philip Crane. I say his name and my blood boils. As I've mentioned previously in this video, whilst reading historical fiction, I have a understanding that the men in these books are going to act in certain ways that no longer fit our certain modern sensibilities. Essentially what I'm saying here is that I know I'm going to have to deal with a certain level of misogyny, a certain level of entitlement that these men have. I have a threshold that I can tolerate. Benedict exceeded that threshold. He went above and beyond. Philip Crane, however, he crossed the line so many times, he can't even see the line. That is how far gone he is. At the beginning of this video, I provided a list of triggers, but I want to go ahead and give another trigger warning here for discussions and stigma around mental health, particularly depression and postpartum depression. There's fairly detailed descriptions of a person unaliving themselves. There's also going to be a lot of discussions regarding child neglect and child abuse, particularly physical abuse. So if those are topics that you don't want to talk about, you don't really want to engage with right now, I totally understand. Take care of yourself. That always comes first. Just skip this section or exit out of the video. That's totally fine as well. Anyway, this book opens up and we are in the point of view of one Philip Crane, unfortunately. And in this prologue, he describes his marriage to Marina. Now, Marina in the books and Marina in the show are extremely different, in that Marina in the show actually has a personality and a story arc, and Marina in the books exists simply to die. I know that sounds harsh, but it's true. In the prologue, Philip goes on and on about how sad, desolate, and isolated Marina is. She does not leave her bedroom. She does not interact with her children. Philip constantly makes Marina's depression, undiagnosed depression, I should mention. Of course, in this time, mental health was not even really considered. It was not a thing, the idea of mental illness. So there's no diagnosis for what Marina is going through, but I think it's safe to say that she is depressed, pretty severely depressed. Philip continues to blame Marina for her own mental illness. He vilifies her throughout the entire book. We'll get to that when it comes, but just know that it never gets better. He never sees Marina as anything beyond a burden, and that is why we have an issue. And it's just one of the many issues I have with this man. Anyway, long story short, and I hate to say this so bluntly, but this is literally how it plays out, Marina ends up walking into a lake and attempting to drown herself. Philip sees her, he pulls her out of the lake just in time. Marina ends up passing away a few days later due to complications and an illness from being in the lake, a freezing lake, for so long. And this is when we jump ahead about a year and meet up with Eloise. Eloise Bridgerton, I believe, has had the most dramatic character shift and change between the books to the show. Really, the only thing that show Eloise retains from her book inspiration is her inability to stop talking. Once Eloise gets started, she doesn't stop. But that is really the only similarity between the two of them. Eloise in the book wants to get married, wants to have children, whereas Eloise in the show is uninterested in marriage and even more uninterested in having a child. So we meet Eloise in the book, and she has been corresponding with Philip via letters ever since Marina's death. Now, Marina is actually Eloise's cousin in the books, and so she writes and gives her condolences, and from there, her and Philip exchange letters, like I said, for a year after Marina's passing. Until finally, one day, Philip writes her a letter and very bluntly says that he wishes to marry her and he would like her to come visit his house and for them to see if they suit. So Eloise, after not responding to that letter for well over a month, decides randomly one night that she is going to go to Philip's house in the country. She sneaks away from Colin and Penelope's engagement party, if you remember from the end of the last book. And she gets a carriage and makes her way to Philip's house. Philip is pretty shocked that she just randomly showed up because she never responded to his letter. And he's a bit of a dick to her, if I'm being honest here. I mean, this is really just the start. And the kids, Oliver and Amanda, they have really grown up with no discipline, no regulation, no love or attention from any sort of parental figure, especially not their father. So they're pretty wild. They're also 8 years old. And 8-year-olds in general tend to be pretty wild, but when you add on the childhood neglect, then yeah, they're pretty wild and untamed, and they do not like Eloise. So Eloise ends up staying at Philip's home, and one day Eloise is walking through the house and she ends up tripping over a string that Oliver and Amanda set up. They pranked her basically, and she falls pretty hard on her face and it leaves a pretty hefty bruise, and she's also injured and sore in other places. Philip goes off on the kids in front of Eloise and then takes them out of the room to what I assume he did is he spanked them, and then he brought them back into the room and made them apologize to Eloise. Spanking or any other form of corporal punishment should never be used in a child. Yeah, sure, this was another time period or whatever, but it will never sit right with me. And the way that like spanking and other forms of like corporal punishment are talked about so flippantly in this book just boils my blood. Like, yes, I know that that was how children were treated, but I don't want to fucking see it. I do not like the way that it's so casually mentioned in this book. Soon after this incident, we find out that Philip's own father was extremely physically abusive towards him. Like, he would take out a whip and whip Philip on his back. Like, Philip has a multitude of scars from this kind of treatment. And Philip reveals to the reader that he is afraid of becoming like his father. And in fact, there was an incident in which his kids, Oliver and Amanda, pranked one of their governesses. And he was so upset with them that he went to go get a whip and then was so disgusted with himself, as he should have been, that he locked himself in the greenhouse for like an entire day. The highlight of this book comes next, in which all the Bridgerton brothers show up and beat the shit out of Philip. And frankly, this scene was not long enough. Eloise has been staying at Philip's house, like, unchaperoned, and they're obviously unmarried, so this is, like, a huge stain on her reputation. Anthony and Benedict are, like, the primary, like, punch throwers, which I appreciate. I really wish they could have gotten in, like, another few licks, but the opposite of what I wanted happens, and they end up, like, bonding with Philip. And how they bond is by talking about a tavern lady, bar lady's, like, giant boobs. I was reading this book and I just kept thinking it could not get any worse, and then it just did. Anyway, Anthony says that the two of them have to get married, and so they do, and I hate it. I hated it. I hate everything about this book. The thing about Philip is that he cares more about his children's appearance. He cares about the way that they're presented to the world. He cares about whether or not they behave, especially in company. That's what he cares about. He doesn't actually care about his kids. He doesn't even fucking like them. He chooses every day to lock himself up in his greenhouse. That's the other thing. Oh, I'm about to get really mad. I'm about to get really, really fucking mad. So these two get married, right? And Philip, in his puny little pea-sized brain, he thinks that this is the perfect marriage. And why does he think that? Because during the day, he can lock himself in his greenhouse and Eloise can deal with his kids. He doesn't even have to know that they exist. And he doesn't even have to interact with his wife. He can just be in his greenhouse, on his own, neglecting everyone in his family. And then at night, he can fuck Eloise as much as he wants. And that is what he deems a perfect marriage. In case I didn't mention it yet, fuck Philip Crane. Fuck Philip Crane. I feel empathy for the child that Philip was, who went through that emotional neglect and that physical torture. But I feel no sympathy for the grown man who, despite saying that he doesn't want to continue these cycles of abuse and neglect, is doing exactly that, and who only sees Eloise, his wife, as basically just a glorified babysitter for his kids that he gets to fuck whenever he wants. Anyway, then comes the absolute worst scene in the entire book. I know. You thought it was already bad. It's about to get worser. So Eloise approaches Philip while he's in his precious little greenhouse. And she tells him that she does not like the way that Nurse Edwards conducts herself around the kids. She does not like the way that she treats the kids and the way that she, like, I think she sees her, like, rap them on the knuckles or hit them on the knuckles or something, and she doesn't like it. So she voices her concerns to Philip. And this man tells her that the kids probably did something to deserve it, and that if she's so concerned, maybe she should look into it. Oh my god. You cannot be serious. You cannot be serious. Like, and then, oh my god, and then it just gets so bad. Philip then proceeds immediately after to kiss Eloise and start feeling her up, and he's trying to get something going. After she told him that she's worried about the safety and treatment of his children. And then, when Eloise stops him and is like, this is not the right time for this, and why is our marriage only ever about sex? He then gets mad at her. Imagine that. Imagine that. And he walks off like the little pathetic baby he is, because Eloise ruined, I'm pretty sure he uses the word ruined, his idea of their marriage as like the perfect union. Then he shows up at the nursery and actually sees Nurse Edwards hitting the kids on the back with a book, and he gets like super angry and throws her out. And then finally, by the grace of God, he decides to be a good dad, and he hugs the kids and, like, whatever. I don't care. I don't care. Literally, screw you, man. Screw you. So then Philip goes to Eloise and tries to explain himself. This is, like, the quintessential Bridgerton, Julia Quinn, like, final Hail Mary where the hero will go and like apologize to the heroine after being like a complete, just unapologetic dickhead the entire time, and then there's like finally this like one apology at the very end. Except Philip doesn't know how to apologize. Philip doesn't know how to do anything other than blame other people for his shortcomings. He then goes on a tirade about how much Marina sucks. So basically he tells Eloise, our marriage is perfect because compared to what I had with Marina, it has to be perfect. And he basically, I don't care. There's other things that happens in the book. What happens at the end? I don't know. There's just like a scene where Oliver, Amanda, Eloise, and Philip go out on like a day, like a family day. I don't care. You've done irreparable damage to those children. There is no way that they can adapt anything in this book for the show. Not a single thing from this book is going to work. Not a single thing from this book do I even want to see on screen. None of it. Go back to the drawing board. Start over. Anyway, I don't even have to read the rest of the books in this series to know that this is undoubtedly the worst. Like, the worst. It's not even a contest. Suddenly, Book Benedict is looking like a gosh darn dreamboat. So, full transparency, you guys, I am currently getting over a cold, so if I sound kind of off, or if my vibe is not what it usually is, that's probably why. When he was wicked, Michael, Sterling, and Francesca Bridgerton's love story. I can confidently say that this is the best Bridgerton book and the best Bridgerton book romance. This book just gave me everything. It gave me angst. It gave me unrequited love. It gave me forbidden love. It gave me, like, friends to strangers to friends to lovers. It gave me the pinnacle of historical fiction smut. Like, I do not think it can ever get better than this. I was quite literally on the edge of my seat. I couldn't contain myself. What I love about Francesca, and what you will understand as I tell you her story, is that she is not one of Julia Quinn's typical heroines, in that she is not inexperienced when her and Michael sleep together for the first time. That is the only time in this entire series, I'm pretty sure, that we get that. And not only does Francesca know what she wants, she tells Michael what she wants. Oh boy. And then, I'm getting so ahead of myself, but I need to explain myself. I need you guys to know just how exquisite and immaculate the smut is in this book. Michael Sterling has the dirtiest mouth of any Bridgerton man. He is walking in the footsteps of Show Anthony Bridgerton. He took that baton that Jonathan Bailey was reaching out, he took it and he fucking ran with it. We'll get to that because I'm skipping ahead. Let me take it back, and let's start from the beginning, shall we? So the book opens up and we meet our hero, Michael Sterling, who, Miss Julia, we need to just hang it up at this point, okay? Because she describes this man as the biggest rake London has ever seen, but apparently so was Anthony and Benedict and Colin, so how are they all the biggest rake in London, or that London has ever seen? Like, it's logistically not possible. I actually wrote right here, like after reading the first chapter, I wrote, I can already feel this book is going to be my favorite Michael Sterling supremacy. A completely factual statement. So we start off the story and we're kind of like dropped into the middle of it all. Michael is pining after Francesca, who happens to be the wife of Michael's very close first cousin, John. Now, John is an earl of their Scottish estate called Kilmartin. They also have a house called Kilmartin House in London. He's been married to Francesca for about 2 years now, and Michael has always been in love with Francesca, but he's kept that to himself. Obviously because it's just like a scandalous thing, and because he loves John like a brother. But Michael, Francesca, and John are a kind of duo. Francesca really considers Michael to be her friend as well as John's cousin and basically brother. And this dynamic is so fucking exquisite. I love a love triangle when everyone has like a different kind of relationship and you have loyalty between all three of the characters. Like, it's just so good. Anyway, so there's like a bit of fluff and you kind of get like involved in their lives and whatever. You see their dynamic as a trio. But very quickly, John gets sick and he just dies in his sleep. It's very sudden, very shocking to everybody. And there's kind of this question of who is going to inherit the estate. Because it will either go to Michael, or if Francesca is pregnant and bears a son, then the house will go to him. And Francesca actually is pregnant. Unfortunately, though, she miscarries and loses the child, and so the Kilmartin name and the earldom goes to Michael. And Michael, after the events of losing his cousin, he just is kind of like rejecting the earldom and rejecting Francesca. He doesn't really want to be around her because every time he sees her, he still like loves her and desires her, and that just makes him feel even worse. So he's avoiding her altogether. Now, Francesca comes to him after having her miscarriage, and she actually called on Michael to come see her, but he refused to. So she goes to him, and at some point during their conversation, she mentions that Michael would have likely been a father figure to the baby, and this just kind of sends Michael into a tailspin. He completely snaps, he runs away to India for a couple of years, and Francesca is basically left in charge of the earldom and all the different estates in the Kilmartin name. Now here's the thing, even though I love this book, and I do love it to death, it of course has, its downsides. The first one being this whole like India storyline. It's just, it reeks of colonialism and Orientalism. I won't go into specifics, but just know that throughout the book, Michael is constantly being referred to as like having a scandalous tan from being in India for so long. And then he also tells like a lot of stories about how he like had a sword fight with this like exotic Indian princess and then they slept together afterwards. Like it just reeks, man. It fucking stinks. But the thing is, I've come to realize about Julia Quinn novels is that even when I'm really enjoying them, she will always find a way to kind of like bring down the mood and ruin the vibe, either by throwing in this like blatant colonialism and this like fetishization, exotification, I'm not sure exactly what the word is, of India and the people who live there. Or, most likely what she does, because she always does this, she will just like sprinkle in a little bit of like casual misogyny. It happens all the time and it's very unnecessary. I'll point it out when it comes, but just know that it happens a lot, and it just ruins the vibe, man. Like, it really sucks. Anyway, Michael eventually returns to London about 4 years later, I believe. So Michael returns to Kilmartin House in London, and Francesca also happens to be there at the same time for the London season because she plans on finding herself a new husband. Not because she necessarily wants a new person to love or companion, but because she wants a child so very badly. Fran and Michael run into each other again. There's lots of awkwardness and weirdness between the two, but the important thing is that Fran eventually realizes that Michael actually has malaria. He asks her not to tell anybody, and she gives him that promise, and eventually Francesca, Michael's mother, and John's mother, so Michael's aunt, all eventually come to Kilmartin House to live. So Francesca and Michael are both on the marriage mart this season. And it's actually really funny because Michael is like the biggest catch of the season, and so a lot of women will come to Francesca and will sort of ask like, oh, where's Michael? Is Michael coming? And she gets like really annoyed about it. We know it's jealousy, but she doesn't realize it yet, which, just another exquisite trope. But Francesca is no slouch herself, and she has actually become the most eligible woman on the market. And one day, after a pretty big ball, Francesca wakes up and there are just piles upon piles of flowers in the sitting room there for her. And of course, Michael then gets jealous. I love a healthy amount of jealousy. Like, these little sprinkles of jealousy, just, mwah, chef's kiss, amazing. So at one ball in particular, Michael is looking around for Francesca, of course, as he always does, and he sees that she's not there. So he steps outside and he actually hears her laughing in the garden, and he hears like a man whispering, and at first he gets like really jealous and upset, and he's about to go, but then he hears Francesca start like saying no and stop, and so he comes and he sees, I honestly forget the dude's name, but he sees someone trying to like kiss her and being kind of forceful with her, and he gets in the way. So Francesca ends up going home earlier than Michael, and then when Michael returns home from the ball, she approaches him and confronts him. She actually barges into her room and asks him why he was so upset with her over what happened. She also goes on to press him and says like, you've been so distant from me ever since we lost John, like what the hell is going on? And this is the moment where they share their first kiss, and it was so good. Oh my god, there was like all this tension. Michael was like, you shouldn't be in my room, and he was just like so overcome, and they were like in the heat of the moment, and she was like, why are you so upset with me? Like, what is it? What have I done? Oh my god. And he like can't tell her that like, you haven't done anything, it's just that I love you, but I know that I can't have you. Like, oh my god, you guys, I was living. Francesca is so freaked out by the kiss and how much she enjoyed it that she runs off to Scotland. Now, I neglected to mention this before, but Colin actually plays a pretty pivotal role in Francesca and Michael's story. Previously to this moment, he had actually approached Michael and said, you know, why don't you just, like, marry my sister? Why don't you just marry Francesca? It'll work out for both of you, and you obviously love her, so just do it. And Colin saying that sort of, like, plants the idea in Michael's brain. That was a little while before in the novel, but now we're like back to the present. Francesca has run away to Scotland after the kiss, and Michael is obviously pretty bummed about that, and Colin runs into him at the like men's club, and he lets Michael know that he has actually just proposed to Penelope Featherington. So you see like the timelines are all kind of converging. So this whole thing with Michael and Francesca is happening at the same time as romancing Mr. Bridgerton. Anyway, so Colin says basically he's giving Michael an excuse to go to Scotland and relay the news that Colin and Penelope are engaged, and Michael takes that opportunity and he goes to Scotland to see Francesca. So Michael shows up to kill Martin, and he at first proposes marriage in like a very practical sense, like you're already the countess of this whole place and I'm the earl, so why don't we just like get married, very practical. But then he asks her, don't you want another kiss? Oh my god, you guys! This man has me, like, twirling my hair, kicking my feet. It's embarrassing. Unfortunately, Miss Julia Quinn low-key ruins the moment by having Michael, like, in his mind when he's thinking about seducing Francesca and kissing her, he's like, oh, I'm gonna make it so that she can't marry anybody else. I'm gonna, like, ruin her for all other men. Like, in a sense, the way that he's thinking about it, he's thinking of, like, trapping her into marriage, which, like, here's the thing. I try really hard to, like, compartmentalize when I read these books. Like, every time that some, like, casual misogyny and, like, weirdo behavior happens, I try to just, like, okay, I'm just gonna, like, put that in a box. Sometimes the box overflows. Philip Crane. I don't even know why I coughed. I'll say it boldly. Philip Crane. But with instances like this, I try to just, like, okay, we're just gonna, like, ignore that. We're gonna look away. Besides all that, like, weirdness that Miss Quinn had to throw in there for some reason, this scene is super hot. Like, you have no idea. Basically, Michael, okay, so, like, when Michael and Francesca were friends, a lot of times, because he was this, like, notorious rake, she would ask Michael to tell me about, like, your conquests or the women that you slept with. And so Michael now whispers in her ear how she was always so curious and always wanting to know, like, when he did something wicked. I'm a fan of dirty talk, but a lot of times it's, like, not really done well, or it comes off a bit cringy. Michael Sterling, he does it, and he does it well. He does it with class and decorum and a little bit of sluttiness, and that's what we love. So long story short, they sleep together, and afterward, Francesca is just, like, super uncomfortable around Michael and just really feels bad about the whole thing. So Francesca basically tells Michael, I am only going to marry you if I end up pregnant, and then Michael sort of responds by saying that he only really slept with her to trap her into marriage, which, like, Michael, please stop being a weirdo. I'm trying really hard to root for you. Why does Miss Julia Quinn do this? Moving on to the next smut scene. See, I thought the first scene of them together was hot. I was not prepared. I was not physically, mentally, or emotionally prepared for what happened next. Basically, they're having sex, and Michael sort of tells her to do something, and Francesca says no. She tells him, and I quote, to beg her. I dropped my damn phone. She says, beg me. Good God. She's just giving him orders. Lay down on the bed, Michael. Don't touch me, Michael. Oh, it's living rent-free in my brain right now. I need them to transcribe this scene, word for word, into the TV show, okay? I need every single line in the show. So Francesca and Michael continue to sleep with each other until Francesca eventually has her period, which she's actually, like, really broken up about, and she didn't expect to be. So after she gets her period, she tells Michael that they can't continue this, like, sleeping together, this relationship anymore. So Francesca goes to Michael and says that I just can't keep doing this anymore. I never thought that I would feel passion for another man like this. And in Michael's mind, he interprets her saying that as, like, her using him for sex because he's, like, a rake and he has a reputation. So they start going back and forth a little bit and arguing over, like, the situation that they're in, and then eventually eventually Michael reveals that he is in love with her and has been in love with her ever since the beginning when they first met, when she was married to John, and that he can't only be with her if all she wants is to sleep together. He can't be with her in half measures. So Francesca eventually comes around and agrees to marry him. And then Michael goes and has this whole little moment, like kissing her and being like, "You're mine." And I'm pretty sure he says something along the lines of like, "I'll like tie you to this bed and won't let you go until you're pregnant," which, Michael, sweetie, why did you have to ruin this with a breeding kink? We're gonna put that moment in the box and just forget about it. So eventually Francesca gets a letter from her mom announcing that Colin and Penelope are engaged and to be married in like the next few days. And Francesca is kind of pissed because she's like, what the hell? Why am I always the last to know when things are going on in my family? Also, the letter tells her that Eloise is also getting married, and so Fran is just feeling really left out. So then Michael suggests that they have like a quickie little wedding, and Francesca agrees, and so now they're married. However, Francesca is not able to really say that she loves Michael. He admits it freely all the time, but she can only really say that she's glad that he's her husband. Like, that's as much affection as she can admit to. So Michael's malaria ends up resurging sooner than they thought it would, but actually it turns out it wasn't malaria at all. It was like some other illness. However, at the time, Francesca did believe that this was his malaria, and she started to fear that he was going to die. So one day she says to Michael, "I gotta go," and she actually goes to John's grave, and there she admits to him that she loves Michael. She loves him in a different way than she does John. Throughout the book, Francesca will talk about how her and John were just so compatible from the beginning. They could finish each other's sentences. They always knew what the other was thinking. But with Michael, she feels passion and devotion and this almost like soulmate type of thing. So it's like different kinds of love. But she admits this to John, and she even says that she thinks that John would actually approve of them being together. And Michael, unbeknownst to her, is standing behind her, overhears the whole thing, and they sort of reconcile, come together, admit that they're in love, and yeah, that's basically it. Happy ending. You guys, I love this book. It gave me all of like the angst that I want from a ship, but it did it in such a way that like I felt bad for everyone involved. The denial of feelings from both sides was like so exquisite, and I love how it almost like flipped on its head. Like in the beginning, it was Michael like denying, and then towards the end of the book, it was Francesca doing like the denial sort of thing. The smut was like A1, A+. Best of the entire series. I know that they recently recasted Francesca, which, while I'm sad for the actress who left, I know that she's going on to do like a main role in another Netflix project, so good for her. And I'm actually really excited because I think what they're going to do is have Francesca debut in the next season, and I think she might meet John and get married, and we may see John and Michael and sort of be introduced to them, so that way once her season really gets going and we have Michael as a love interest, people already like know about her and know about that relationship. I'm like 85-90% sure that that's what they're going to be doing. It makes perfect sense, especially because Colin and Penelope and Francesca and John and Michael's story like overlap so much. I was also speaking to a friend of mine, Mariam, whom if you haven't checked her out, go ahead and check her out. I'll have her channel floating somewhere here. But we were both talking while she was reading this book, and the both of us sort of like headcanon Michael and John as Southeast Asian. I just see it in my head so vividly. So if we don't get Southeast Asian Michael, I may be a little bit upset. Totally irrationally upset, but still upset. It's so effing hot. I don't know why I said effing. I curse on my channel. It's fucking hot. Okay, so let's go ahead and break this book down as quickly as possible so I can get out of this dress and take off this makeup that is already binding itself to my face. Now, It's in His Kiss, I think, is the Bridgerton book that surprised me the most because it almost feels like it's not a Bridgerton book. And by that, I mean that Hyacinth is such a different heroine from all the ones that we've seen previously. Hyacinth is essentially a mini Lady Danbury. She truly does not care what anyone thinks of her. She says whatever is on her mind and frankly doesn't care whose feelings she hurts, especially if she believes in what she says. And Hyacinth always believes what she says. I think all the Bridgerton heroines have some level of like spunk and wit, but Hyacinth is truly like in a league of her own. And it's honestly really refreshing. I think she is without a doubt, one of my top 3 Bridgertons, if not my favorite book Bridgerton ever. And the way she gets to know her love interest, the way that they spend time together and get to know one another, it's not through balls or society functions or teas like we would usually see. Instead, they go on these like mini heists and are trying to solve this like treasure hunt. It is so fun. Like when I think about this book, I just think about how much damn fun I had reading it. Let's jump into the actual summary, okay? So the book opens up and we meet our hero, Gareth St. Clair. My lisp really does not like his name. So he is the second son of a baron and basically a huge disappointment to his father. And Gareth kind of, I wouldn't say he enjoys playing up that role, but he definitely leans into it and gets up to a whole bunch of debauchery while away at school. So Gareth's father, I'm telling you guys, this is not going to be pretty. So his father calls him into his study and basically tells him that he is going to be married to a woman who will hopefully help their family and bring them some money, and that is how Gareth will be useful to his father. Now, Gareth is obviously not a fan of this situation, and him and his father go back and forth until his father finally just like blurts out that Gareth is actually illegitimate. He is not really his son, and that apparently Gareth's mother had him with another man while the Baron was away. So after we find out that info, we skip about 10 years later, and Gareth's older brother has actually died, and so now the baronetage is going to be passed down to Gareth instead. And Gareth is almost 100% certain that his father is not going to allow this to happen. He is going to, in some way, reveal the truth of Gareth's birth. He doesn't know when this is going to happen, but he's sure that his father is going to do something to make sure that Gareth does not become the next Baron. So then we discover that Gareth is actually Lady Danbury's grandson. She is his maternal grandmother, and she loves Gareth more than any of her other grandkids. She tells him as much. And it was actually Lady Danbury who invited Gareth to live with her after his father told him all that info. Gareth kind of ran away / he was kicked out of the home. So he's been living with her, and she's really the only family member in his life that is left after his brother died, who he feels close to and feels loved by. Gareth has just been gifted a diary written by his paternal grandmother, Isabella. It is written entirely in Italian, and this was something that his brother left to him after he passed, so he really wants to get it translated, and that is where Hyacinth comes in. Now, Hyacinth actually comes every week to Lady Danbury's house to read to her on Tuesdays, and this is how her and Gareth kind of connect and get to know each other. She reveals that she knows a fair bit of Italian, and that is how he gets her to agree to translate the diary. The next important scene to come up is between Violet and Hyacinth, and I noticed that this is actually a reoccurring thing in every single Bridgerton book, where Violet will sit with her child and talk to them about love, about their strengths and weaknesses, and I personally really like that. I feel like Violet, of course, has a really good insight into who they are as people, but more importantly, she has an insight into their failings and what might stop them from finding happiness and true love. And Violet points out to Hyacinth and to the reader that Hyacinth tends to push people away when they challenge her or even match her wit and her, conversational abilities. Is that even a word? Whatever. Now, Gareth and Hyacinth are at a ball. They're dancing together, and Hyacinth notices that Lord St. Clair, aka Gareth's father, except not really like his biological father. Anyway, he shows up, and Hyacinth knows that they have a strained relationship. Everybody knows this. So she tries to distract Gareth. But Gareth ends up running into his father anyway, and they get into an argument. Lord St. Clair basically just lays into Gareth. He's degrading him, he's berating him, and he keeps questioning who is your father? I wonder who your father could be. And Gareth, in his saying that, sort of realizes that his father also really wants to know who his wife slept with. And then finally, Gareth's dad tells him, I see you hanging around with that Bridgerton girl. There's no way she's going to want you. Now, this really angers Gareth. If there's anything you should know about him, it's that his father can really set him off. A lot of the things that he does is in retaliation to his father. And that becomes a big problem later on. So Hyacinth finds Gareth after this confrontation with his dad, and they end up kissing. And like I mentioned, Gareth kind of does everything because of his father, at least in some part. And when he kisses Hyacinth, he kind of, in a way, is doing it to get back at his dad, being like, oh yeah, I could have her, or, she wants me, which, let's just say it's icky. Hyacinth runs away after their kiss, and while both of them immensely enjoyed themselves, they don't really say that to each other, and they kind of think that the other person didn't enjoy it, even though we all know that they really did. Now, this entire time, Hyacinth has been at work translating the diary. It takes her some time to do it because she's not totally fluent in Italian, but she does figure out that his grandmother, Isabella, hid diamonds in the Sinclair house. And this is where the heist and the treasure hunt really begins, because at night, both of them sneak into the St. Clair house. They locate a cabinet, and behind that cabinet, they find a secret compartment, and in that compartment, they then find another letter, aka another clue. So a little while after, Gareth comes to the Bridgerton house, and he meets with Hyacinth, and he also runs into Violet and Gregory. Violet, who is trying to push Gareth and Hyacinth together, and Gregory, who is just, you know, needling Hyacinth and constantly teasing her. Gareth and Hyacinth then sneak away, and they go on a promenade where Hyacinth tells him that she translated the clue, and the next clue that they're looking for, or potentially where they will find the diamonds, is in the St. Clair library. She then starts to complain about her family and how much her brother teases her and how all the Bridgertons are sort of always involved in each other's business, and Gareth suddenly gets very angry and sort of tells her, you know, you need to appreciate your family. You don't know what I would give to just have one more person in my life who I cared about and who cared about me. And it's when Gareth is saying all these things that Hyacinth realizes that she loves him. It's just like unbelievably sweet how like immediately it hits her, and how it's Gareth sort of talking about like his desire for a family that makes her realize that she loves him. Like, it's just so cute, you guys. I love Hyacinth. It is unfortunately at that moment where Hyacinth and Gareth run into Lord St. Clair again. And Lord St. Clair and Gareth have this conversation and this confrontation in front of Hyacinth, where you as the reader and them too can obviously tell that they're talking about Gareth and his, you know, illegitimate birth and dubious parentage, but Hyacinth is just kind of left in the dark. Like, she knows something is going on, that they're sort of talking in circles and talking around some secret, but she doesn't know what it is. And Hyacinth, being Hyacinth, that really bugs her. Hyacinth likes to know everybody's business. She's a busybody, she's nosy, and she's perfectly aware of that fact and happy with that fact. And I love her. Like, if there's one thing that you need to know, it's that I fucking love Hyacinth Bridgerton. So Gareth and Hyacinth return to her home, and Hyacinth sort of tells him that she always wondered what it would have been like to have a father, but seeing now what Gareth's father is like, she thinks it's probably better not to have one at all than to have one like Gareth's father. Which sounds really harsh, but the way she says it and the way Gareth takes it, he, like, appreciates what she says. And Hyacinth then starts to talk about how she knows that she's not an easy person to love, and this is when Gareth has his own moment of realization. When Hyacinth is talking, he thinks, actually, you know what? I think it would be really easy to fall in love with Hyacinth Bridgerton. It's so cute, you guys. They're so cute. Oh my god. If Michael Sterling and Francesca Bridgerton got me hot under the collar, then these two just make me want to, like, squeeze something till it pops, because they're so cute. Gareth is, like, totally overcome with his feelings for Hyacinth. He kisses her, but then there is still this part of him that is thinking, like, oh, if I, like, marry Hyacinth, then that'll be, like, a one-up on my dad, and, like, hey, look, I married the girl that you said would never want me, which, once again, concerning. Gareth then goes to Anthony and asks for Hyacinth's hand in marriage, and Anthony very readily and very speedily agrees. He was convinced that there would be nobody who could ever match Hyacinth and her wit, so he's very happy to let them get married. But Anthony does question the rift between Gareth and his father, and this kind of sends alarm bells off in Gareth's head. Gareth becomes convinced that if he wants to marry Hyacinth, then he has to, like, seduce her and, like, ruin her, in order to make sure that they have to get married. And once again, this is it. This is the moment where Gareth slips into that, you know, casual misogyny that we see from all of Julia Quinn's heroes. It's not great. Gareth sneaks into her room at night, they have sex, and then they immediately go to the St. Clair house, to the library, and they find the book that Isabella mentioned, and they find another clue, another letter inside that book. But while they are on their way running from the house, they then run into who else? Lord St. Clair. So during this particular argument, Lord St. Clair tells Gareth, everything that you do is because of me. Every single decision that you've ever made, you do it to get back at me, to get a reaction out of me. The reason that you're marrying Hyacinth is because of me. And, you know, the man's not wrong. Gareth eventually, weasels his way out of this conversation with his dad, and Hyacinth had been hiding behind, this wall or street corner, and when he goes back he sees that she's not there, so he starts running towards the Bridgerton house, and they both get there at the same time, but Hyacinth slams the door in his face, but since Gareth already climbed into her bedroom before, he knows how to do it, so he just does it again. And she tells him what all of us know to be true, which is that his father is right, and that the primary reason that he wants to marry Hyacinth is because of his father. Don't get me wrong, he does like Hyacinth, but at this point, his hatred for his father is clouding his feelings for Hyacinth and the love that he's starting to feel for her. And Gareth, upon realizing that he could lose Hyacinth because of the grudge he has towards his father, sort of decides to let that go, and he confesses his love to Hyacinth and also confesses the truth about his birth. And Hyacinth just takes it in stride like I knew she would. She's a badass. She's great. She basically laughs it off and was expecting so much worse. So then there's another moment where Gareth slips back into not even casual misogyny, but just outright misogyny. When Hyacinth finds him at the St. Clair house, he was going to break in to try to find the diamonds without her, and he just gets royally pissed that she's out late at night now that they're officially engaged and going to get married. He basically tells her once we're married, you can never go outside without my permission, and if I have to, I'll tie you to the bed to make sure that you can't go anywhere. I feel at this point, whenever these moments happen, I'm almost desensitized to it. I'm numb to this shit now. And I'm also almost 100% sure that the show is not going to include any of these lines or these moments. So I think that is why I'm able to sort of brush them off, because I'm okay, well, once I get the show version of this couple, I'm sure I'm gonna love them 100% and like them so much more. Anyway, so Hyacinth actually figures out from Isabella's diary who Gareth's real father is, and it turns out that his biological father is actually his uncle, so Lord St. Clair's younger brother. And when Hyacinth tells Gareth the truth, he sort of has this realization that his parentage honestly doesn't even matter. It just doesn't have any sway over him anymore. He doesn't care. What he cares about is Hyacinth and the family that he's going to make with her. The two of them pair up one last time to go to St. Clair house and look for the diamonds, but they don't end up finding them. And one last time, when they're on their way out, they run into Lord St. Clair, and Gareth sort of thinks to himself, if this was any other time, he would have done anything to piss off his father, to say anything to rile him up, but now he just truly doesn't care. So Gareth actually tells Lord St. Clair the truth about his birth, and that his biological father is Lord St. Clair's brother, and Lord St. Clair just he just shuts up, he doesn't say anything. He basically turns to Gareth and Hyacinth and says, you're gonna need her dowry, and then he goes into the house and shuts the door. And that's the last we see of him. Gareth then does this really sweet thing where he gets down on one knee and he makes this whole speech about all the reasons why he wants to marry Hyacinth and why he loves her. It's very different from his first proposal, when the main motivation was to just piss off his dad and prove to his dad that he could marry Hyacinth. It's really, really sweet. I'm not gonna lie, when I first read this ending, I was kind of angry, because I was you spent this whole book trying to find these diamonds and you didn't fucking find them. But thankfully there is a cute little epilogue where it is actually their daughter who finds the diamonds, but she kind of puts them back where she finds them, so that maybe one day Hyacinth will eventually find them, because she has been looking for them ever since. Alright, one final time. Let's do this, shall we? Miss Julia Quinn really pulled out all the stops with this final book. I feel she took all the leftover ideas that she had, all the leftover tropes that she hadn't used in her books, and then decided to just jam them into this one final novel. And unfortunately, the execution was not great. When I was first starting out with this book, I was really enjoying myself. I was having a good time. I liked that Gregory was not so similar to the previous Bridgerton brothers in that he is not like a rake like all the rest of them. He actually really believes in love and is actively searching for like his one true love. And I thought that was like really refreshing and really cute. And I was digging the trajectory of his and Lucy's love story. And then the final, like, 30 to 40% of this novel happened, and it just turned into a full-on CW-style melodrama. It was insane. So in the first chapter of this book, we are dropped right into the middle of the action. Gregory has stormed a wedding in the middle of the ceremony. He's professing his love to the bride, asking her to run away with him, and right before she's meant to give her answer, the chapter cuts off, and we go back about 2 or 3 months. So Gregory is now in Anthony's study, I believe, at Aubrey Hall. He's talking to him, and Anthony is basically telling Gregory, you need to find some kind of a life path. Usually, second, third, and especially fourth sons, they don't really have a lot of money. They either go into the army or the clergy, but none of that really appeals to Gregory. So Anthony is basically telling him, you gotta choose some kind of life path, or you have to get married. Like, just, you gotta do something. So after having this talk with Gregory, Anthony sends him out into what I believe is like this week-long stay at Aubrey Hall that Anthony and Kate are hosting. And when Gregory goes out, he sees the back of this blonde woman's head, and he just falls instantly in love without even really seeing this woman or her face. And he, shoots across the room to her and introduces himself. So the woman he's instantly fallen in love with without even really seeing her face, her name is Hermione Watson, and she's actually the best friend of our heroine, Lucinda Abernathy. Now, Lucinda has always sort of played second fiddle to Hermione, so Lucy is not at all surprised when Gregory comes up and is obviously infatuated with Hermione. She has seen this happen time and time again. Now, Gregory actually ends up asking Lucy to dance because Hermione can't dance, like she's bad at it, so she always tries to like pawn off the guys who ask her to dance to Lucy instead, and Lucy is like, okay, fine, these guys, if they want to get to Hermione, they try to impress me, whatever, I'll dance with him. And she enjoys dancing, so she does it. Lucy cuts to the chase while her and Gregory are dancing, and she says, look, I know that you are in love with Hermione, that you have eyes for her, but you should know that she is actually in love with someone else. It turns out that Hermione has this secret love affair with her father's secretary, Mr. Edmonds, and they've been exchanging love letters for a long time now, and Lucy is not a fan of this match, if that's what you can even call it. She sees absolutely no future between Hermione and Mr. Edmonds. She knows it's an impossible match, and she tells Hermione as much, but Hermione keeps saying that there really is no choice for her. She saw Mr. Edmonds. She saw like the back of his head, very similarly to how Gregory saw Hermione, and she fluttered is what she calls it. She fell instantly in love, and there's no choice for her. She just loves him. She has to be with him. Propriety be damned. We also find out that Lucy is all but engaged to a young man, a family friend, named Mr. Hazelby, and this match has been arranged by her Uncle Robert, who has been her guardian and her brother's guardian for as long as she can remember. And Lucy is more than happy to go along with this arranged marriage. She doesn't really want true love, nor does she think it's real. Like when Hermione talks about seeing the back of Mr. Edmonds' head and fluttering and falling in love, she just dismisses it, doesn't really believe in it. So the next day at Aubrey Hall, Gregory makes it a point to be paired up with Hermione when all the lords and ladies, the single ones, go on this promenade to the shopping center. And when he tries to talk to Hermione, she's really giving him nothing back. He's putting on his best face, trying to be as charming as possible, but it's just getting nowhere with her. And Lucy sees this, and Lucy actually kind of likes Gregory for her friend. He's handsome, he's from a good family, and while he may not be a first or even second son, he's a much better match than Mr. Edmonds. So the next morning, Lucy actually pretends to be sick in order to get Hermione to go downstairs to breakfast without her and hopefully see Gregory and talk with him. And he actually manages to engage Hermione in conversation. Now, when Hermione goes back upstairs to Lucy, she tells Lucy that she actually got along well with Gregory, that she was charmed by him, but she's actually very confused because she is convinced that Mr. Edmonds is the only one for her, so how is it possible for her to take a liking to Gregory and, you know, flutter around him as well, in her words. In that moment, it is announced that Lucy's older brother Richard has arrived at Aubrey's Hall, and he is there to see Lucy and bring her back to their home to see their uncle. He wishes to see her. Now, Lucy is obviously very shaken up, like, why the hell is he here? What's going on? It must be an emergency. But Richard is really only interested in Hermione wanting to know how she is, and Gregory picks up very quickly that Richard has feelings for Hermione. Eventually, Lucy and Richard get to talking, and Richard lets her know that their uncle has officially signed the papers and Lucy is to be married to Mr. Hazelby ASAP. And Lucy feels strange. She suddenly starts tearing up and crying, and she has no idea why. Of course, we as the reader know exactly why. What I really enjoy about this book is just how involved Kate and Anthony are in Gregory's life. He really looks up to their relationship and really admires the love that they have for one another, and that's just like a running theme throughout this entire book. And so it just kind of makes me think ahead to Gregory's season in the show, and I just can't wait to see this storyline. I really hope they keep it, having Kate and Anthony constantly around and giving Gregory advice, especially Kate. Kate and him have this really adorable relationship, and I really hope that we see this in the show as well. So during the final ball at Aubrey Hall, Gregory and Lucy are talking, they dance, and then they both notice that Hermione is nowhere to be found, as well as Richard. So they're both missing. And Gregory immediately starts to panic and thinks that they've gone off somewhere together, and if they are found, they will have to get married, and that obviously freaks Gregory out. They are searching all over the house trying to find them before anyone else does, and eventually Lucy is the one who breaks free from Kate and Gregory and finds them. When they find Richard, Gregory and him get into a fist fight and a scuffle, and Kate sort of drags Hermione out from the bushes and the orange trees where they are, and Hermione's dress is all rumpled and her hair is kind of a mess. So obviously they've been, at the very least, making out, if not doing more. And Hermione just sort of bursts into tears, runs to Lucy and hugs her, and tells her, "I fluttered." Once again, that word that she uses when she talks about being attracted to somebody, liking somebody, those first feelings of like falling in love. Gregory proceeds to get white girl wasted after this because obviously Hermione and Richard have to get engaged after what happened. And while he's drunk, Lucy is on her way back to her room and they run into each other and they actually end up kissing for the first time. The next morning, Hermione comes to Lucy and apologizes and tries to explain the situation. She basically says that she's just been very confused. She thought that she was in love with Mr. Edmonds because it was like that lightning bolt feeling when she saw him, but then she talked to Gregory and started to like him, and then when she was with Richard, she just felt so comfortable, they made each other laugh, and she realized that that is really the feeling of love, feeling like you are at home with someone. And Lucy kind of gets really shocked because that is the same way that she feels about Gregory. She gets those lightning bolt feelings, and she also feels comfortable, and he feels like home to her. While Lucy is having her revelation, Gregory also comes to the understanding that he never really loved Hermione. He more was just desperate for love and sort of just like projected that onto her. They didn't really suit one another at all. It was always a struggle for them to have any kind of conversation. Gregory also finds that he can't stop thinking about Lucy. So he finds her right when her carriage is being packed and she's about to go home to her uncle, and he sort of apologizes for the kiss, which is the gentlemanly thing to do. And basically both of them in their own heads know that the kiss meant something, know that they are pretty much in love with each other, but they just won't say it. And so then they're also like mad at each other for pretending like the kiss didn't mean anything. It's like miscommunication trope filled with like mutual pining at the same time. It was great. I actually love this scene. So we jump ahead about a month, and now Lucy's wedding to Mr. Hazelby is only a month away. So Hazelby's father, whose name is Lord Davenport, they both come over to her home for dinner one night. So her uncle Robert is there. There's Hazelby, her betrothed, and then his father, Lord Davenport. I know there's a lot of people, just bear with me. So they're all there at dinner, and Lord Davenport is a fucking prick. Like, he looks at Lucy's gums and like touches her waist to see if she has like childbearing hips. He like interrogates her at dinner and makes her recite her times tables because he doesn't want his son to breed with a idiot, but he also doesn't want her to be like too smart and have things to say. Like, it's just a mess. And Lucy is the kind of person who really doesn't stand up for herself and just kind of allows people to walk all over her as long as it doesn't create issues. She doesn't like confrontation. She wants everyone to be happy. So even though she like knows that this is wrong and is pissed off, she doesn't do anything to stand up for herself, and she's just kind of like waiting for someone else to say something. But of course, nobody does. Which, you know, I understand and I sympathize with being a people pleaser, but girly, we need to grow a backbone because this man was inspecting you like a brood mare. I believe it's the next day when Gregory and Lucy run into one another at a park and they get to talking. They fall back into their same routine of talking, teasing. It's all very comfortable and very familiar until, of course, Lucy reveals that she is going to be married very, very soon to Mr. Hazelby. And Gregory is shocked because it turns out that Mr. Hazelby is actually gay. After this scene, the next most important thing that happens is Violet sitting down with Gregory, and just like in all the books previously, she basically states to Gregory what his issue is. Like I mentioned, she does with every single one of her children. It's actually a little bit hilarious the way that she sits them down and is like, this is what's wrong with you. This is why you can't find true love. So you need to fix this, like, immediately. I personally think it's so funny. She's basically like every single one of her children's therapist. So basically, she tells Gregory that because he is so far in age from his 3 brothers who were all born consecutively, he feels like he always needs to prove himself to them and prove that he can do things on his own. But then the issue is that being the youngest, things also come to him very easily. So when there's a challenge, when he needs to fight for something, he tends to just give up rather than fail while trying. So at the next society ball, Gregory ends up seeing Lucy across the room, and he feels all those feelings he felt when he saw Hermione, except just like 10 times more intense. He asks her to dance, and while they're dancing, he realizes that Lucy is it for him. Not only does he feel those like lightning bolt feelings, he also just feels so comfortable with her. They're good friends. They make each other laugh. He likes talking to her. And so he tells Lucy to meet him in the library alone. And while they're there, they profess their love to one another. And they both agree that Lucy will have to break off her marriage and engagement to Hazelby. So Lucy goes to her Uncle Robert and says that she wants to end the engagement, and he flips out and tells her that that is not possible, and that apparently they owe Lord Davenport, remember, Hazelby's father, they owe him a debt, and Lucy is part of that debt, because Lucy's father apparently betrayed the crown and sold secrets to the French during a war. So he sold secrets and is a traitor to the crown, and Lord Davenport knows about this and has like written proof of this. And if they don't want anyone to find out about that, and for their whole family to, you know, get caught up in scandal, for her older brother to lose the earldom, because that will be taken away from him, Lucy has to shut up and marry Mr. Hazelby. So Gregory tries to go see Lucy the next day, but she refuses to see him, and she keeps refusing to see him up until the night before the wedding. Now Gregory manages to sneak into the house, they reaffirm their love, and they end up sleeping together the night before the wedding. But the next morning, Lucy still decides to get married. Gregory sees her get into the marriage carriage. Marriage carriage. So then we take it all the way back to the prologue, and we see Gregory burst into the church. The entire town is there. This is like a huge fucking wedding, and Gregory bursts in. He professes his love to her, Lucy. I was about to say Hermione. To Lucy. And Lucy says no. She says no to Gregory in front of everybody. It's a mess. It's an absolute fucking mess. Because then Lord Davenport like attacks Gregory and they get into a scuffle. And then Anthony and Colin are trying to like drag Gregory out and into a carriage. It's just like a total mess. They eventually get Gregory out of there and they're all driving away, all the Bridgertons. It's like this really embarrassing thing. And the ceremony with Hazelby and Lucy continues, and they do get married. Now Gregory, for the first time in his life, is not going to back down from a challenge. So he sneaks his way back into the house where the reception is happening. He finds Lucy alone in her room, and he's basically asking her why and telling her, like, look, you haven't consummated the marriage, you can still get it annulled, but Lucy keeps saying no, no, no. And then finally, Gregory manages to rattle the truth of the blackmail out of her. And you know, up until this point, Gregory was actually doing pretty well. Of all the male heroes in the Bridgerton verse, he wasn't doing too bad, okay? There wasn't really any casual misogyny being dropped anywhere. Yes, he was misguided. Yes, he knows how to instigate drama with, you know, interrupting that wedding, but it was a little iconic. But then Gregory proceeds to do something that's just so, it's so out of nowhere. Like, when I tell you this entire, like, final part is just, like, CW soap opera, like, moment, one after another. It's insane. So basically, Gregory realizes that Lucy will never put her own happiness over her brother and Hermione's happiness. By the way, her brother and Hermione got married, and now Richard is going to be the Earl. So he knows that she'll never, you know, do anything to hurt them. So he picks Lucy up, puts her over his shoulder, and then ties her up in a maid's water closet so that she can't run away because he has a plan to fix this. It's just, it's not great, is it? What the fuck is happening? Like, when this was happening, it felt like a farce. I was like, what am I reading right now? Like, this doesn't even feel like a Bridgerton book. Like, these final few chapters, I felt like I was reading an entirely different series. Like, Miss Julia Quinn kind of just went off the rails with this. Anyway, Gregory ties her up. I can't believe I said that. I cannot believe those words came out of my mouth. He ties her up and says, just give me 1 hour to fix this. And, you know, Lucy doesn't seem too upset about being tied up, but at the same time, it's just not great. Anyway, let's move on. So Gregory goes to find Hermione and Richard and tells them about the whole situation. And Richard's like, yeah, there's no way that my father would betray the crown. Like, I knew him when he was alive. That's just not something he would ever do. And so Gregory kind of starts to doubt it too. However, at the same time, Lucy's uncle Robert finds her in that closet. He takes her, drags her out, starts threatening her, saying that she has to go through with the marriage, that he will stand there and make sure that she consummates it. And he even pulls out a gun and, like, threatens her life and points it at her. So Gregory ends up finding them, and then he pulls out a gun and points it at Robert. This is so insane. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna push through because it's just so wild. I can't even deal with it. So Gregory is pointing a gun at Robert, who's still pointing a gun at Lucy and threatening her. And it's basically revealed that Robert is actually the traitor. And then suddenly the room is filled with, like, Richard and Hermione and Hazelby, and, like, everybody's there. And then Gregory hears, like, a gunshot. So then he shoots Robert, and then Robert falls on top of Lucy, and then Gregory thinks that Lucy was shot, but turns out she's fine. And yeah, it was a mess. Just a mess. I mean, Jesus, I feel like I'm watching fucking Dynasty. So anyway, things work out. Lucy is fine. She hasn't been hurt. And Gregory manages to get Lord Davenport to shut up about the whole, you know, traitor thing. And he also makes sure that Robert leaves the country, never to be seen again. And then finally, Gregory and Lucy can get married. And in the epilogue, we actually find out that Gregory and Lucy outdo Edmund and Violet because they have 9 fucking kids. 9 kids, pretty much back to back. Lucy, God bless you. You're a saint. So I changed up the shirt to do this, like, final thoughts part and outro because I don't know if you guys saw, but I had some massive pit stains. Oop. Anyway, I'm a sweater. Let's move on. So I thought I would provide some final thoughts here and most importantly give my definitive ranking of all the Bridgerton books minus the first one. I'm honestly, like, myself a little bit shocked by my ranking. I'm sure that it'll shock some of you, especially all of you who have gotten to know me through my love for Canthony. But I think reading these books really just showed me that while Kate and Anthony in the show, I think, are going to be one of my favorite couples of all time, and I really don't see any other Bridgerton couple beating them, at least in the show universe, I have to say that they are no longer my number ones in the book Bridgerverse. So my ranking of the 7 Bridgerton books that I read is as follows from bottom to top. Coming in at number 7, the obvious pick to Sir Philip with Love. Trash. Trash, trash, trash. I don't want to see any bit of it in the show at all. At number 6, we have An Offer from a Gentleman. Still trash, not as trash as Sir Philip and his bullshit, but still kind of trash. Coming in at number 5, we have On the Way to the Wedding. This one would have been higher, but then we got to all the melodrama at the end. And while I am a fan of, you know, a little bit of drama that was just way too much. Like, just way too much, and frankly, it got a bit stupid. Coming in at number 4, we have Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. Colin and Penelope are cute. I wish that Julia Quinn hadn't made her lose all that weight before they got together. Thankfully, they will be doing away with that in the show. God bless. And like I said, I feel like their book, their issues as a couple, were probably like the most realistic and understandable of all of the couples. Coming in at number 3, we have the Viscount Who Loved Me. I know, shocking, but really, the more I think about book Kate and Anthony versus show Kate and Anthony, I feel like the more qualms I have with book Kate and Anthony. Like, book Anthony really could be like a bit of a chauvinist sometimes. But then again, all the Bridgerton guys can be. That's the thing. Like, the one thing, if you have to take one thing away from this video, it's that every single one of the men in these books are misogynists on some level. You just have to sort of figure out for yourself which type of misogynist you can stand. For me, I cannot stand a child abuser misogynist, aka Philip Crane, and I cannot stand a classist misogynist, aka Benedict. Coming in at number 2, we have It's in His Kiss. And I feel like I ranked this one highest because it was just so damn fun and so like refreshing and different from all the other romances. I love the treasure hunt aspect of this story. I pray to God that they keep that in the show. And I just love Hyacinth. I love how she truly just says whatever she wants, whenever she wants. I love that she is happy to say something even if it means other people won't like her, because she's just that convinced that she is right. And finally, coming in at number 1, the undisputed best Bridgerton book, When He Was Wicked. Everyone give a round of applause for Francesca and Michael. Best Bridgerton book couple. I said it before, I'll say it again, Francesca and Michael, their smut scene will never be beaten. It's like just one of the best smut scenes, the best sex scenes I've read in any romance book. And Francesca and Michael delivered in all the tropes that I love. You know, mutual pining, friends to strangers to lovers. They have great banter. They challenge one another, and yet they also like tease and have fun with one another. I love the sort of like angst of feeling like they're betraying John by being together. Looking at this list, there are only like 3 books and 3 rankings that I feel really strongly about, and that is the first and the 2 last ones. I firmly believe that When He Was Wicked is the best Bridgerton book. I will not hear any arguments. And I also believe that To Sir Philip with Love and An Offer from a Gentleman belong on the bottom in that order. The other books, I can definitely see arguments, you know, either way about whether they should be ranked above one another. It's really only those like 3 books that I feel very passionate about, that they should be where they are. The rest, I can give or take on a given day. So yeah, I guess that's the end of this video, the end of this Bridgerton reading experiment. It took me a damn long time to film this video, and I know it's going to take me even longer to edit it. I'm not looking forward to that. Go ahead and let me know which books are your favorites and your least favorites. Let me know what you're excited to see adapted on the screen. I have a strong feeling that next season they're going to start planting seeds for Benedict, Francesca, and maybe even Eloise's storylines. Maybe not Eloise, but definitely Benedict and Francesca. I feel like we're going to see Francesca debut and potentially marry John by the end of the season. And I think we're definitely going to get that masquerade ball where Benedict sees Sophie for the first time. All very exciting stuff. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it wherever you want to, if you want to. I went off script. This is not my usual outro. If you guys want to find me anywhere else, all those links will be down below. I love you all very dearly, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye!